Okay, so hi everyone, Ted5 here, and today I'll be talking about object-oriented programming. So this will not be a super deep dive into it, but it'll just be an introduction to the concepts. Okay, so far in the past lessons, we have learned about the basic logical building blocks of Python, right? Of programming in general, actually. So we have learned that we can have variables, and we can set it equals to variables are containers of information that can store value, right? That we can access the variables by using the variable names. And we have also learned that we can modify these variables, right? So if I write x equals to 1 after that and print x, then we see that we have the 5 corresponds to the first print statement, and 1 corresponds to the second statement, and so on. And on top of that, we have also learned that we can repeat lines of code, right, using for loops. And the variable I helps us keep track of the number of iterations that have occurred so far. Okay, and yeah, basically these are logical building blocks that I'll assume that these are logical building blocks of programming. But today we're going to talk about something slightly different, right, in another direction, and it's more of organizing your code in a neat way. So let's just say, right, we wanted to write a program that keeps track of people, right? So what information do we need to store? For example, we need to create a name variable to store the person's name. So let's just say we have name, and then we also need, let's say we want to create an age variable to represent the person's age, right? So in this case, it'll just be that, and this way we can access the variables just like expected. But now the question is, what if we want to store 2 people instead, right? What if we want to store 2 people? Then how do we do it? Well, one way we learned, right, is that in order to store multiple variables, right, you can use something known as a list. So we can possibly do this, right? And let's say we want to store a second person, right? Let's just call him Bob. And perhaps because we want to store Bob's age as well, right? The age will also become a list. So maybe perhaps instead of name, right, now we write names and ages, right? Because they represent names and ages of multiple people. So now we have 2 people, right? And in order to access the first person, we need to use index 0. In order to access the second person, we need to use the index 1. So sure enough, okay, ages, this typo, right? So sure enough, you can store multiple people like that. But once again, you know that, so right now, index 0 corresponds to Tan Qian Hao with the age of 19, and index 1 corresponds to Bob with age of 20. But as you go along, right, if you're trying to store more and more people, right, sure, each time you add somebody, you can append to the list, right? You can append to the list, but then each time you store another person, you need to append to all the data fields there are. And this can become a bit of a hassle, especially if you're trying to delete the people as well. Then you need to delete the information from all the fields. So for example, I wanted to delete, I can't just add Tom like that, right? I just need to add Tom's age as well. If not, the list, they are not aligned in a sense. But if I wanted to delete Bob, right, I'll need to delete both his name and his age. And you can see that this, as you have more and more people, right, it becomes more and more of a hassle. So like what happens if right now I wanted to add in a third parameter, right? Let's say I wanted to add in height, right? Then this way I need to create a list with 3 people, and then I need to go and change the append stuff, right? I need to change the append stuff. So I need to write height is dot append, right? And then over here I need to put the initial height and blah blah blah. And I also need to delete heights index 1 if I want to delete Bob from the list. So you can see that it starts to get a little bit unmanageable. And this is where the concept of encapsulation comes in. So object-oriented programming, right, is a way to encapsulate all this information in these thing known as objects, right? And so I'll just show you what I mean. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete this code, right? So if I want to, so for the first part, right, let's just create a class called person, and I'll talk about what class is later. So to create a class is like a template for an object, right? So in order to define a class, right, class person, right, person being the name of the class, right? By convention, it's good to have the P as a capital, the first letter as capital, and then over here I write colon, and inside the indentation, right, whatever lines of code, once again, whatever lines of code you write with the indentation, is inside the class, and whatever lines of code you write outside the indentation, right, like line without the indentation, like line 6, is not inside the class. So yeah, okay, so inside the class, let's just write pass for now, right? It's an empty class. I just want to illustrate a concept. So okay, now let's create our first person. So if we want to create a person, so let's just say call the person TCH, right? Short for Tan Qian Hao, and we can write TCH equals to, so TCH is a variable, right? And what does it store? Instead of storing the name, of the person, like the string or the age, right? We're going to we're going to do TCH equals person, and after writing the person, right, which is the class name up here, right, after that, I'm going to put round brackets, just like calling a function. Okay, so if I go ahead and run this, right, we see that nothing is printed out, and an object TCH is actually created. So if I go print TCH, right, what do I see? I see if I print TCH, I see that a main dot person object is at this address, right? So I went and print TCH, right? TCH is a person object, right? And you see this thing over here. So two things we notice here, a few things we notice here, right? Main is just the file, the name of the file, right? Person is the class person over here that we wrote, right? And object is an instance of this class. So right now we're creating this is known as creating a person object, and we'll see what it's useful for later. And lastly, we see this address over here. This is where this TCH object is located in memory. So I'll talk about that more. Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So what's the value of this, right? Now let's say I want to create a name variable representing TCH name, right? So I can write, instead of just writing name equals to Tan Qian Hao, right? I can, instead of that, right, before the name variable, right, the name, before defining the variable name, I write TCH dot. Okay, so let's see what this does. So okay, so over here, let's go ahead and print. Let's try to print name, right? Let's try to print name first. And we're gonna see that when you try to print name, they say name is not defined. That's because, right, TCH dot name is not the same thing as name, right? If you create name like that, this variable is creating a variable called name, right? But if you write TCH dot name, this variable name, you know, it belongs to TCH. So if I want to access TCH.name, right, naturally I'll need to put TCH.name. So if I go ahead and run this, then we see that, in fact, we have successfully accessed TCH's name. So yeah, okay, so what's the point in doing this? Now, if you want to create another person, right, let's say I'm going to create Bob, right? So I create a variable called Bob, and I set it him also to equals to a person. And if I go ahead and print Bob over here, then you're going to see that TCH, when I print TCH line 6, right, is a main person object at this address, right? And it ends with a 70, right? F70. But if we look at the print Bob statement, right, it's also a main person object, right? But it ends at 160 instead of F70. So what this tells us is that TCH, right, when you print TCH, you get the address, the memory location of TCH being this, right? But when you print Bob, you get another memory location. What this tells us is that TCH and Bob are separate objects. So now, right, Bob is a new person object, right? It's not the same as TCH, even though we called the same class over here. So what this is called that is known as instantiation. So the class is a template, right? The class is a template for an object, and we want to create instances, right? An object is an instance of a class. Okay, so we create, so there's a few key differences here. Over here we define a class called with the name person, and this tells us that the person that is a template for a person object. Then over here when we write TCH equals person round brackets, right, we're creating an instance of this class, right? And that's an instance of class is known as an object. So TCH is now a person object, which is why when we print TCH, we see person object at this location, right? But when we create a new object, right, a new instance of the person class, right, Bob equals to person, then when we print Bob, we see that we get a different memory location, right? And that tells us that TCH and Bob are different objects. And what does this allow us to do? Right, this allows us to do things like this. So if I go ahead and write bob.name, right, let's say after I write tch.name equals to how I write bob.name equals to bob bob lim. Okay, then if right now if I print tch.name, right, I'll still see Tanchen Hao, right, because this is the name variable belonging to the tch object, right? But if I go ahead and print bob.name after that, you see that bob.name and tch.name, right, they are different variables, right? Bob.name is Bob Lim, but tch.name is Tanchen Hao. And this means that even though the variables have the same name, right, the fact that they belong to a different person, right, belong to a different person object means that tch.name and bob.name are different variables. So they're completely different variables, right? And each one of them is called name, but they belong to a different person. It's a different identifier. So that's essentially what objects are useful for, right? So if we go ahead and continue over here, right, we can set tch.age, right, equals to 19, bob.age equals to 20, and if we go ahead and print, yeah, then we can print the tch.name, right, and we can print bob.age, right, and we see the corresponding values pop up. So now there's a sense of ownership, right? Now 20, right, this age variable, which is set to equal to 20, this age variable belongs to the bob object. So you can see that by creating objects in Python, right, we have now essentially packaged, right, these two variables, right, under the tch object. Yeah, and we go ahead and print tch, we're still gonna see this main person object over here. So essentially, yeah, objects are a way of packaging variables, and in the future you see functions can be packaged under objects as well, but there are way of packaging information like variables under an object, under a certain label like that. So with that, yeah, let's end the video here, and in the next video we'll be talking about how how to how to optimize it even more, right? How to streamline the procedure of creating a person even more.